2005 picnic. And I want to thank all the people that helped us put this together. Too numerous to go through one by one because it's pretty much a collective effort. But I especially want to thank the church for giving us the use of the building. It would be pretty hot outside. And I thought the food was unusually good this year. So I want to thank everyone that brought food too. Today we've got a few different things going on. First I want to mention that you can become a member of the Historical Society just by going up to the very nice ladies at the front table who are now waving and going yoo-hoo to you and giving them a small amount of appreciation. And I hope, how many people here are members? Oh, that's good. You know, someone in the front here is saying they think so. And, you know, I know how that goes. It's like people ask me if I'm a member of the community club. And it's like, well, if they ask me, I am. I mean, you know, I'll write the check whenever they catch me. So we're a little bit the same way. So we've caught you. So fair's fair. Go sign up. There's wonderful jewelry for sale up there. Karen Moran's parents, Cy and Verrill, made jewelry under a designer label and under their own name for many years. And as part of their estate, some of that's been donated to the Historical Society. So please look at the display up front, and you can get a little bit of Topanga history. Other business. During our July meeting, we have our election. And for that, I'm going to introduce Barbara Allen, who is our Vice President and electoral person in chief. She's just arrived back from Diebold, where she helped set up their machine. So we'll see what happens with our election here.
Thank you. You want to lower this for me?
I would love to. There we go. Let's see something. Let's see.
That's good.
That's good.
Thank you. Alrighty, so I'm going to read off the slate for the board, and then all members can vote when I'm finished by raising your hand, one hand. Buzz Tarlow, Barbara Allen, Ami Kirby. Do you want everybody to stand up so everyone else?
See who they're,
Okay, Buzz Tarlow was just up here. Ami, you want to stand up? I'm here, Barbara Allen. Kathy Berklow, Karen Moran. Where are you, Karen? Joan Ware. Pearl Sloan is not here. Scott King. Bill Berge. Is Bill here? No. Felice Monterey. Thank you. French names and my tongue don't go together. Jean LaCour and Dan and Roberta Kirby, who are touring the United States somewhere. So they're not here. Would everybody in favor of this slate please raise your hand? Anybody opposed? Thank you. Alrighty, the ayes have it and the slate passes. You know why this happens. Nobody else wants to do it.
I don't think it's quite true that nobody wants to do it. You know, the society, we have our board meetings, which are supposed to be, you know, board meetings. And we actually pack the board meetings. I'd say almost half the people that come aren't on the board. And people just like them. And we have to drag out all sorts of extra chairs. We actually bought extra chairs for the Historical Society this year. So it's a very healthy, vibrant group with a lot of people contributing. And how many people have actually been into the Society offices and archives in Pine Tree Circle? That's a fair number. If you haven't, you should go on over. Ami, what are the hours?
Oh, every Wednesday from 10 to 1 and every Sunday from 1 to 4. Or if you want to come for a special project, just call me, 1969, and we can set up a special time for you to come.
Yeah, you know, the archives are just fascinating. You know, my personal find was remember the group Canned Heat? There's a tape in there, an interview with Bear Height, who was one of the main members of the band, just a few town's history. And you know, you poke through those archives, it's just, you know, fascinating stuff in there. So how are we going to get some of the good stuff out? Well, Michelle Johnson, would you stand up, please? Famous Jeopardy writer and other shows, has been working for a long time on rewriting the Topanga story. You're all familiar with the book, and it sold out and is out of print. We're redoing it. Actually, Michelle is redoing it with a lot of help, and we're going to be publishing that. So we'll be after you for fundraising to help pay for some of those costs so we can get it out to the town. But it's going to, I don't know, what is it, like, how many new pages are there in this thing? Guess.
Yes, 100.
100 new pages of material. And some of the old stuff will be revamped. We're planning, I think, on having 2 editions of the edition. One is like a real fancy fundraiser type thing where you get a leather slipcase and a DVD that accompanies it and whatever, and then probably just a regular hardback edition. I think this time we're going to skip the paperback version. But these decisions are all to be made. But anyways, you can look forward to that. There's a lot of people working on it. And I want to thank Karen Moran, Dr. Karen Moran, for being our program chair. I don't know how many of you guys come to all these quarterly meetings with the programs. A lot of people. She's been putting on some really great stuff, and we really have to give her the credit for that because she comes up with it and does a huge amount of work to put on these shows. I mean, when you watch the show, just watch how much work she has done. This one is on this church and the history, and so without any more ado, I'm going to wave to her to come on up and start the show. And I want to thank you all for coming and most of you for participating.
Before we get started, I wanted to thank Topanga Christian Fellowship and all the board members for creating this beautiful environment we have here so that we can have the function here. The board members, it's a rotating board. We have one, if you want to know the members of the board, it's a rotating board, so that board has come and gone. Not everybody, some people have come and gone. But they work very hard, just like all the boards on of the social institutions in Topanga, and we all wear each other out from time to time. So I wanted to thank Topanga Christian Fellowship for that. I also want to thank Harriet, who played piano for us during our picnic. Harriet celebrated her 90th birthday in April of this year, and not everybody knows, but she played piano for the church for over 20 years. And a piano player of a church can be the heart of the church. Also, we have a very special member here called Dora Dro. She refuses to tell us her age. But she sang in the choir when Harriet was playing the piano. So, do the math. And she said at that time, and I vaguely remember, they wore robes when they were in the choir. So things have come quite a ways since then. We're a little more casual today. So I wanted to thank them for coming out and being part of the history of Topanga Christian Fellowship. Our topic today is the importance of historic preservation. Our guest speakers are going to share information about the origin of Topanga Christian Fellowship, its history in this community, and the importance of good stewardship. In 2004, the board of, excuse me if I say, TCF is Topanga Christian Fellowship, AMF is American Missionary Fellowship, THS is Topanga Historical Society. Okay. So in 2004, The board of the church hired historian Portia Lee, founder of California Archives, as a consultant to help facilitate the application for a point of historic interest designation from the State Office of Historic Preservation. Now you know why I've written everything down. I could not have remembered that. She will discuss the importance of historic preservation and provide a status update on the TCF application during her presentation in the latter part of the program. We have a couple of other speakers as well to help fill out the historical background of the church. Reverend Richard Rabel, area missionary for the American Missionary Fellowship, the founding organization of Topanga Christian Fellowship, and Patricia Moore Joshi, trustee and secretary of the church. In addition to that, I just want you to know that Richard Rabel gave the sermon this morning, a wonderful sermon, and he drove all the way here with his lovely wife Moran from Ramona. It's 3.5-hour drive here and a 3.5-hour ride home. So we're going to put him up first, but not before his video. And Portia Lee drove here from Pasadena. Patricia walked down the hill from Eden Ranch. We also have we have the most amazing screen here at the church, so I'm going to make full use of it. And people who have gone to all the trouble to make these wonderful videos and help speakers save their vocal cords. So we have a couple of short videos for you, one from the American Missionary Fellowship. And we're going to begin with that. But before we do, I'd like to share a quote with you from African Wisdom. I just read this in some of a brochure from the school I went to, Pacifica. It's all about the soul. May those from under our feet breathe the warmth of community unto us, so that the peace we seek mounts our bodies and sits on the chairs of our hearts, sprinkling love and joy around us all. Now, why something works in Topanga and why it doesn't is a real mystery to me. But I believe the founding missionary organization, American Missionary Fellowship, had and still does have a lot to offer this community. I would like to start with a video that they put out that shows a brief history of the organization and a couple of vignettes of the work they do. I think most people have an idea of what goes on in a church, but not all that goes on in a church. And many services are provided, not necessarily labeled and designated, but they're provided. And I know from being in the mental health field for many years that churches do a lot of the work that we can't do, that the field can't carry. So all these social organizations work together to help people. And I think this vignette shows that. And I think, for me, growing up here, it shows me why this particular group worked here in Topanga and why it still works. Its influence still works here. So, Ellie, if you'd like to start the first video.
Worship. Taking the light of God's Word to unreached corners of America. This is our mission, our passion, our heartbeat. For more than 200 years, American Missionary Fellowship has been sharing the gospel with the unreached right here in America. A lot has changed since our early days. Back then we were known as the American Sunday School Union, and our missionaries rode on horseback. But our pioneering spirit and passion for sharing the gospel in America have remained the same. With the support of individuals, churches, and thousands of volunteers, AMF missionaries are doing what they do best, seeking out corners of America where there is little or no gospel witness. In the remote woodlands of Maine, on the crowded streets of inner-city Florida, across the expansive plains of Nebraska, in desert towns of California, and in the rugged mountains of Washington, there are many pockets of adults and children who have never been introduced to Christ or have no church to attend. But with your help, AMF makes a lasting impact in people's lives. People like David Smith, one man in a city of millions, a man God brought to the doorstep of an AMF ministry in Florida at just the right time. Or Bonnie Wood, a teen in an Idaho town of only 400, ignored by the world, but befriended, led to Christ, and discipled by an AMF missionary family. Two people touched by AMF and transformed by the power of Jesus Christ.
In our ministry with AMF, we come into an area, we discover what the needs are, and then we find ways to meet those needs. In our ministry in the Tampa Bay area, we discovered that drug addiction is a devastating factor that we must deal with. Jacob's Ladder is an aggressive ministry dealing with persons that have come to a crossroads in their life and are struggling with some type of an addiction.
Smoking crack cocaine was so bad for me that I spent my entire paycheck. I would get paid, and that same day I would spend it all. So I drove out the gas and spent all my money smoking and moving and driving with my left knee. I mean, it took two hands to smoke. It took me all night until about daybreak. And I tell you, it was very wearing on my body.
David came to us in one of those very unique situations. He looked real shabby. He just from looking at him, you can tell he was down and out and probably at the end of his rope. We discovered later that David was a professional golfer, and a little bit we know just by looking at this man, where he had been, the things that he had already accomplished in life, and what God had in store for him.
At the age of 18, I thought I would make the PGA Tour. I'm the type of person that I like to think that I don't settle for second best. I worked hard at reaching the level of par golf.
He had a divorce, his wife left him, and his life went downhill at that point.
When my wife left me, it was devastating.
David lost his last hope.
I found myself on the side of the road, broken down, without a job, without any money. I felt so alone, and I was addicted to crack cocaine. I felt I had nowhere to go. And I went walking down the street, looking for a church to go to, looking for my God, for Jesus.
David walked upon our church and cried out in desperation, "I need help." The brothers responded to him, "We believe we can help you." They began to share with him the program in Jacob's Ladder and that there was hope there.
I went looking for a church because I felt that that was the only chance that I had. And once I crossed and stepped into that church, my addiction was over.
David has been with us now almost 3 years, and he has proven that God can change a person's life.
He drew me to him, and it took God himself to help me with my addiction. It took divine intervention for me to get rid of my problem, which was crack cocaine.
When we went to go get his vehicle to put it in storage, the only thing we found in it on the seat was a gun. Who knows what would have happened had he not came here. It was God's timing. It was God's opportunity to use this ministry to reach him.
God is that complete, he's that thorough. So I can only thank AMF for being there and having the outreach programs and giving the support for different outreach programs across the country.
Many miles from Florida, another AMF ministry brings light to a valley that was virtually unreached.
What I like most is you can, when you go out into the forest, you can ride for hours in any direction and still go nowhere. Just be by yourself, and anywhere you can go, you see wildlife. I've been here my whole life, so I know where everything is, and I can go on foot for miles and go on hikes and still know where I am. I love it.
I think one of the things that hit Karen and I when we came to the valley was just everything spread out, the vastness, the beauty hit us. But as soon as we get into their lives, we find massive amounts of depression, massive amounts of suicide attempts, loneliness, just that whole bitterness feeling. And I think it's because they don't have God to turn to. When I first got here 10 years ago, we started a camp, Old Faithful Christian Ranch, which brings together about 16, 17 churches. It's been a joy to watch the kids come to Christ, to watch the kids grow up. I could tell from the very first year, I just knew that this is something that God wanted.
Camp was like a spiritual high for me. I would forget about everything that was happening, and I'd be so happy, and I would be outgoing, and I'd talk, and I'd laugh, and I'd play and be with my friends. I could live at camp forever. Then when my mom would come pick me up, it was like, almost like tying a rock to myself and throwing myself into the ocean. That's what it felt like. My family was falling apart. And my mom was an alcoholic, and my dad a workaholic, and our family life was just a wreck. I remember just a trashed house. It was just filthy. She had a group of drinking buddies that she would go to their house, go get me some beers, go get her some beers, and go outside and play. It was like I didn't have a mother.
I think her mom had just led him falsely along, and there was deep anger.
We came home, and all our stuff was just rifled through, like almost like a robbery. Just everything was thrown everywhere, and a couple suitcases were gone, and we didn't know where she was. It was devastating. She just burned all her bridges and left.
There was nothing else to do. You can't let them drown. And that's what it would have been. It would have been leaving 5 children drown.
It was my personal nightmare.
And that's when things got really desperate at times, and she just would say, I can't carry this anymore. I can't go anymore.
Lance stepped in and said, okay, I'm gonna help this family because I know they need it. He was really involved with my father and did counseling with him. And Karen would help us make meals, and at that moment she had our whole family over to her house every Thursday night.
You're invited into the home, come for meals, we'll laugh with you, we'll play with you.
Karen went to study and taught me how to be a good worker, clean right, and how to eat right, and how to do my work good, and how to prepare myself for numerous other things that were happening that wasn't involved with my family. After that first couple of months, I was so excited because I could make cookies and manicotti, and I could get hundreds on my tests.
When we proved that we meant her good and not harm, I think she was willing to allow us to mold her a little bit and let God mold her.
I think that was the first moment that I wanted somebody to pray for me, because before it's like, okay, sure, pray for me, see if I care. It's not helping any, what's it gonna do? But I felt the utter need to be prayed for and have someone other than myself taking my burdens to the Lord and saying, it's not hers anymore, it's all of ours.
And I think the Lord drew them into our lives and into the life of the church because we were that kind of people. For her and for them, the whole family.
I was so overwhelmed by love. It was such a radical change for me. From going from one extreme to the other, I started, changing. I was like, Lord's so good, you know it. And you can't sit there and say the Lord isn't good, just look at me.
She's very dynamic when it comes to sharing her faith.
She's going to be the director of our girls' camp this year.
You won't find too many people that don't know that Bonnie's a Christian.
The Lord's joy is just in my life. The blessings He's given me. The ability to just face every day and say, the Lord is, made an awesome day for me. I'm alive. I have a wonderful family. I love my father. I've forgiven my mother. And I'm following the Lord, and He's speaking to me, and I listen for His calling. If it wasn't for the Isleys, I probably wouldn't be here today. I had that much influence on my life.
Across America, people like David and Bonnie follow Christ today because AMF missionaries are there, designing their ministries to meet the unique needs of the people they serve. Impact. That's what it's all about. Making a difference for one individual, for one family, for one community, for one multiplied by thousands in all corners of America. AMF is here for the rancher whose small remote town cannot support a church, for the Hmong refugee needing a Bible study in his own language, the child at Vacation Bible School who hears John 3:16 for the first time, and the paramedic on the front lines of crisis. We are here for the drug abuser at the end of his rope, and the lonely teen who cries out for help. Join us. Be a part of what God is doing through AMF all across America. Together we can reach the Davids and the Bonnies of tomorrow. American Missionary Fellowship, taking the light of God's Word to unreached corners of America.
Now, I call that a hard job. Unique needs of the people in the areas they go into. Try and figure out a Topangan. Please welcome our first guest speaker, American Missionary Fellowship Reverend Richard Rabel. Reverend Rabel is the area missionary for the southern border field, the area of California that extends from Sunland to the Mexican border, and from the Pacific Ocean to the Arizona state line. He's going to comment on a couple of points in the video and share a few words about Topanga Christian Fellowship and its relationship with AMF. And then he's going to hit the road for his 3.5-hour drive home. Welcome.
We have at least one other stop yet to make. Thanks for having us. It's really a pleasure to be here. Really enjoy this. We're a member of the Ramona Historical Society, and for you who are all members, sometimes we call it the Hysterical Society, because if you've been to some of the meetings, you probably would understand that. So it's a pleasure to be speaking with you. On the video, the last segment with Bonnie, she has since married and moved on with life. And we're really thrilled with the events that have taken place. The inner city of Florida I'm not familiar with, although my wife and I have been in the inner city of Philadelphia years back, and that is a unique opportunity also. I believe the video depicts basically the work we do with different groups. I just wanted to share a few things with you. We are the oldest home missionary organization in the United States. Our roots go back to the 1790s in Philadelphia with a fellow named Reverend White, who established the Sunday school to offer religious instructions for those who could not afford formal education. One of the things that they would do is they provided a library where we would print our own materials to teach the street urchins, as they were known then, to read and write, because there was no way for them to learn. Reverend Wright, along with Dr. Benjamin Rush, who was also, by the way, a signer of the Declaration of Independence, and I had to go check that out. I had to look to see if his name was really on there. and he's on there, founded the First Day Society of Philadelphia, and that later became known as the American Sunday School Union. Francis Scott Key was an author of the national anthem, was among one of our board members. So as you can see, we have a rich heritage historically. In the Philadelphia Sunday and Adult School Association was formed in May of 1817. In 3 short years, the association had formed over 720 Sunday schools in 17 states, including significant work among Native American tribes and African American people. The first missionary was William C. Blair, was commissioned in 1821. He covered 2,500 miles on horseback. I don't quite understand. They had to be a different type of man back then, because about 35 minutes is all I can handle on a horse myself. Throughout 6 states of Pennsylvania to North Carolina, and started over 60 Sunday schools in the first year of his service. During the next 7 years, the organization extended such a wide influence that it was renamed the American Sunday School Union in 1824. It was interesting because in the London Sunday School Union newspaper, an article in 1820, and I'm not going to give you the whole article, but there was one small paragraph in there that said, in the United States of America, the progress of Sunday schools has been truly astonishing. Sunday schools are formed in almost every considerable town and village. They have extended to savages and Native Americans, as well as amongst blacks. ASSU began publishing the American Sunday School Journal in 1830 as Francis Scott Key and Daniel Webster proposed the launch of what we called the Mississippi Valley Enterprise. This is when they made the Louisiana Purchase. If you remember your history, there was a great need to get people into the area, and the mission saw this as a great opportunity to go ahead and be part of that. 6 years later, ASSU was among the first organizations to commission an African-American missionary, Thomas H. Hardy. Nearly 400 Sunday schools were organized in the southern states, and ASSU missionaries reached 40,000 children. The historical record speaks repeatedly of missionary efforts like those of Stephen Parson, who established more than 1,300 Sunday schools and reached more than 83,000 people in 20 years as a missionary. That is one of the things here, being the oldest mission group, and some of the founding of the community and all is from this church. Following the Civil War, the noted Philadelphia pastor and hymnist Phillips Brooks addressed the 41st meeting of American Sunday School Union to propose a resolution to extend the work of religious education to the masses of freed men and women. In the 1890s, the ASSU migrated across the westward expansion, taking the gospel to settlers with Native Americans and beyond to the Rocky Mountains to the Pacific Ocean with the same zeal witnessed in previous enterprises. The New York Times commented that the hardy work of American Sunday School Union for 1 year has accomplished more actual good in the world than and has helped the progress of mankind upward. In 1918, the ASSU had 240 missionaries. By the way, we only work in the United States. My wife and I have worked in Mexico and other places, and one of the men I went to Bible school and seminary with, who sat next to me in classes, was from Ethiopia. He was from the Sudan. He escaped the carnage that still plagues that nation. And I asked him what he was going to do afterwards. He says, I've been sent here to be a missionary to the United States. Kind of surprised us. In 1918, they also published 638,726 copies of books and booklets. If you are a person who likes old bookstores as I do, one of the first things you do is go into the antique book section and look for these. They're little paperbacks or what have you, and you look inside and it'll say published by the American Missionary Fellowship. If you find those and you don't want them, purchase and call me. I'll come get them from you and I'll pay you for them. They're very rare. faithful missionaries W.P. Jackson and T.W. Patterson extended their ministries into the Afro-American communities. The missionaries reached more than 26,000 students by 1944 through daily vacation Bible school. In the 1960s, ASSU was renamed, its emphasis on urban ministries in Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, and this continues across America. In 1950, at the 150th anniversary in 1967, with nearly 3,000 churches out of ASSU and 500,000 conversions have been recorded. To reflect the growing diversity of ministry, the name was changed to American Missionary Fellowship. We no longer do just Sunday schools. We have a number of other outreaches you saw in the video. We look forward to the new millennium. When I was asked to speak, and I was pretty excited to be here, I went and looked in the file to see what was there. And so much of our stuff has been sent to the home office. We have what we call field registries, and as a missionary, that is my responsibility to fill these sheets out as far as the churches and things that have transpired through the year. And then eventually when our file gets so full, it goes back to the home office and then they're put in the archives. Which my understanding, the man who used to do this, his name's Jim Gebhardt, and he has retired, by the way. But there is a notice for him the next time he gets in the office. All the files have been flagged. So Karen, you should be getting some stuff when he gets into the office as far as what goes on. But I just wanted to share a couple things that we found in the field registry sheets from before. Topanga Canyon was on Mission Whitsfield, and missionary Whit was from the Santa Barbara area, by the way. And they called Jack Utterback as their pastor, and he is now giving full time to the work. Mr. Utterback has superintendent of the Sunday school and conducted preacher services there for 9 years. This is from 1943. That was the entry that was placed in there. Another entry that I found, the Sunday school started in 1933, organized by missionary Arthur F. Witt and F.A. Curley, district superintendent. The Sunday school met in the Sylvan Clubhouse with 49 members. Jack Utterback became superintendent in 1936. There were 6 classes in 1937. Then daily vacation Bible school was held from July 13th to July 24th, 1936, with 32 enrollees. No daily vacation Bible school in 1937, but they had sent 16 delegates to the San Diego Youth Conference, or Young People's Conference. It's hard for me to imagine that they had 36 young people that they could send at that time from Topanga Canyon. Just, obviously this must have been a thriving community years back. All right, maybe still is. In September 1939, they had 8 classes with 84 enrolled in Sunday school. In 1943, had 92 enrolled, and in 1945, 100 enrolled. An entry from September 23rd, 1942, organized as Topanga Union Church and Daily Vacation Bible School in August with 86 enrolled, and in 1943, Daily Vacation Bible School had 103 enrolled. The comment that was written in 1948 on the sheet was, "Independent Church doing nicely," and this was taken from the field registry sheets from 1936 to 1959. So that's some of the history of this church and the impact they've had in the community. Thank you for having us.
So that gives a little background on, although the building may not be 70 years old, the organization is. Our second speaker, Patricia Moore Joshi, trustee and secretary of Topanga Christian Fellowship. Patricia is also the owner of Eden Ranch, where many of you enjoyed the Topanga Historical Society picnic a few years ago. Patricia is married to the church attorney, Pardeep Joshi. And today she's going to explain a little bit about the history of the church, church law, and church government.
Well, good afternoon. We've already heard quite a bit about the American Missionary Fellowship and how it helped this church begin. And John Utterback had started a small Bible study in his house. And eventually, families that were in his Bible study bought 1.5 acres of land, which is what you see here, and started saving money to build. And because their bylaws said that they would not incur any debt, they pretty much just built as they could. So it took a while to build the church. But the church was officially opened in the early 1950s. It's interesting that the bell that you hear, somebody should ring that bell before we dismiss today, because that bell was donated by an antique dealer named Streeter Blair, and he got it from a church in Philadelphia. But before it had been in Philadelphia, it had been in Europe. So our little bell up there, which is a great big heavy 250-pound bell, came from Europe and was donated to this church. And donated is what has built this church. Just about everybody donates their time, lots and lots of it. And there are some board members here today, and if they don't mind, I'm going to ask them to stand. John and Nancy Williams. Or Nancy. All of you know Nancy. Bruce Boyle. Bruce made this cross, and he made the sign behind the screen and the sign down below, and it's a labor of love for all of us who work so hard here. Larry and Louisa Dunn. And I would say Karen's been on the board, so Karen should stand up. And we certainly hope, now that she's put all her hard work and effort into doing this picnic, that she'll get back on board with us, because Karen has written some marvelous Christian songs for us as a musician and artist, and plays the piano and sings. So now that this is over, Karen, back to work. You have to kind of wonder why a small community would build a church. You know, when there's all sorts of other things to do and everybody's very, very busy in their day, why bother to build a church? Well, I think it comes from the sense of community and the feeling that if you have a place where you can worship God, and you have a place where you can instill Christian values in the children, that this will create a better government for all of the community. And sometimes we think going to church isn't important, and I'm not going to give you a sermon, but going to church is important, because this country was founded on Christian values, and there are values of right and wrong, and it's a wonderful way for children to learn and to grow. I was asked to speak a little bit about the structure of the church and the government, and I'm going to do it really, really fast. Churches can be one of three things. First, I need to say this is a Protestant church, not a Catholic church. It is a Christian church. Many Catholics have come here, and nothing against the Catholic Church, but it is a Protestant church. Within the Protestant church, there are three forms of church government. It can be congregation-run, which is what the Congregational Church of America is. And in that case, the church members vote on everything, and it's 100% congregation-run. Or it can be board-run, where the congregation elects a board to work as the governing unit of the church. Or it can be pastor-run. Most pastor-run churches arise when a pastor just decides to start his own church. And then, of course, he is running the church. This particular church is a board-run church, and you just met some of the board members. And we feel, and apparently so did the American Missionary Fellowship, that this is the best way to run a church, because there's more accountability, and there's more more structure within the government. And in a small church, you need a lot of people to get in and work, and a lot of people to help with the small details, and to come right alongside the pastor and everybody else and work. This church was incorporated by the state of California in 1942. So it is a corporation. It's a nonprofit Christian corporation. And that gives us, you know, a lot of, when you're a corporation, it gives you a lot of structure, a lot of stability. And we're here to serve the community. We're not only here to do Sunday morning services, although that is our main focus. We are here to worship God. We also have AA meetings here, Al-Anon meetings, parenting classes. We've had lots of weddings, lots of funerals, lots of memorial services. We've had recitals, we've had birthday parties, we've had dinners, we've had swap meets. You know, this building is here for the community. So keep that in mind next time you have an event. And I do believe that that's all I have to say. So I was fast, wasn't I? Thank you very much.
Hopefully, maybe you'll understand why this church is still standing. Aside from the Christian Science Reading Room just up the road, this is the last church in Topanga. That's why we're doing this program. I think the seed for the possibility of trying to get a historical monument status was in the files of this church for a long time. And several members on the board kind of would bring that file out from time to time and try and get it going, not really knowing how to pursue that. But whether you're Christian or not, and if you're a community member and you've lived here a long time and you drive down the road, most of the people of Topanga want this church here and to remain here in this form. When I started my work for the Historical Society, Ami Kirby introduced me to Blvd, who owns the Mermaid Tavern, and he had gotten a historical landmark designation for the Mermaid Tavern, the first building in Topanga to get any official historical designation. So I called him, and he introduced me to Portia Lee, who you will hear in a moment. I would like to play our next video. We're going to talk about historical preservation now, and I think this is something that the community shares in common. Not everybody in Topanga wants to keep all the buildings the way they are. Some want to tear them down. Some want some of them here, some don't want them here, whatever. But there are enough people here to save a few of the structures that we have and to keep the wonderful, unique environment, or I don't know what you would want to call the feeling that we have here in Topanga, but it's quite wonderful. We only have 12 rock cabins. I've never known a person to tear one down. I've known one to come down in a flood, but I've never known someone to purchase one and tear it down. And I think we just, those of us that are working towards having this a historical monument or get it a status would like to keep the simple beauty that it has. So the next video I got from the State Office of Historic Preservation, and I hope by now you know that you have been, they have this statement here where they talk about the vast tapestry of American history, and I hope by the presentation on the American Missionary Fellowship you understand how these two organizations
Well, maybe it wasn't a pivotal moment in history, but it was important to me in my memories. That's why our Girl Scout troop decided to nominate the carousel to the National Register of Historic Places.
I think that people are interested in preservation because
of the traditions and memories that many of these sites hold.
It should be on the register to preserve it, to preserve the spirit of the community, and to preserve the history of the area.
And I think that it's important to show where we've come from. That's a legacy that we have to maintain.
It was really exciting to me to find out that my own grandfather's hardware store was an important part of our town's beginning.
Where do we find our history? Words written on paper give only a part of the story. Throughout our nation, districts, sites, buildings, structures, and objects document our past. These are the resources listed in the National Register of Historic Places.
Well, we used to go down to the theater on Saturday nights. I remember they tore down the theater and they put up an office building there.
The register came at a time when we were tearing down our history. We were a nation of the new, reinventing ourselves as we ignored important aspects of our past. Sites associated with ethnic or labor struggle were consigned to rubble. Objects and whole neighborhoods that defined important communities were lost. Structures that illustrated important engineering feats were replaced. Places associated with historic events became suburban developments. As a country, we were losing valuable historic resources at an ever-increasing rate. The National Historic Preservation Act of 1966 firmly established historic preservation as a national goal. The National Register of Historic Places is the centerpiece of that act. In 1966, the National Register began with a modest list of nationally significant historic places that had been previously surveyed and designated through the work of the National Park Service. From this list, the register has grown to encompass sites, districts, structures, places both ordinary and extraordinary, each linked by unique ties to a singular time and place in America's past. These are places that possess historic significance. They may be associated with historic events or trends, significant persons, or be distinctive and representative examples of an architectural style, engineered design, or type of construction. Archaeological properties can be listed because they contain important information about the past.
At one time we had two different options.
The federal government recognizes the importance of these historic places by requiring that their value be considered when planning federal and federally assisted projects. Tax credits for rehabilitation are available. The vast majority of properties listed in the National Register are privately owned. Listing does not prevent owners from doing as they please with their property. Private properties listed in the register do not need to be open to the public. The role of the register is to recognize the historical and cultural foundations of the nation. Administered by the National Park Service of the U.S. Department of the Interior as our national inventory of historic places, the National Register includes National Historic Landmarks, designated by the Secretary of the Interior for their exceptional value in illustrating our nation's history, historic units of the National Park System, and places nominated by state and federal agencies and Indian tribes. The National Register encourages preservation and provides opportunities for education and interpretation. By researching and recognizing these places, our understanding of history is broadened and deepened. The stories that follow give us but a glimpse of the vast tapestry that is American history. These are the people and places that bring to life the many stories of our nation. Americans using the National Register to preserve their past. At Jamestown, Virginia, English settlers built a town, planted crops, and started new lives. Today, an archaeological field study at this National Register site searches for the location of the original Jamestown fort. In doing so, professionals and volunteers from around the country uncover important information about the first English settlement in America and the early contact between colonists and Native Americans.
The Jamestown Rediscovery Project has two basic goals. One is to find out, of course, what Jamesport was like, or find it. And secondly is to share these discoveries as they're being made with the visiting public. I mean, this is really America's site.
I work with first graders, and their concept of time is very limited. A long time ago to them could be 5 minutes ago. And so when we talk about a long time ago, a lot of times we'll talk about the first Thanksgiving thinking of Plymouth in Massachusetts. And I have never mentioned Jamestown. And I've obviously learned that this is the place to start.
You can find out a lot about people. Archaeology is sort of even-handed. Everybody that lived here threw out garbage, so we're finding the stuff that remains of everyone that was here, rather than just the top parts of society that were literate and could write it down.
We've had a lot of Indian artifacts of all different kinds. Indian pottery, flakes, which is the debitage, we call it, from when they're working something to make it into a tool of some sort. And several arrowheads. This one's probably one of the best shaped ones we've had.
History is something that is more than meets the eye. There's a story beneath the ground everywhere, around historic buildings, even where buildings are gone. And the story is a dynamic story. It's not a relic. What archaeologists are trying to uncover is a way of life in a sequence of events, time passing. That's an exciting part of a National Register historical site.
As America developed, cities and towns were built along rivers and other transportation corridors. Through individual and community efforts, citizens and professionals alike used the National Register to preserve not just individual properties, but parts of entire communities with links to our past. Communities such as Shepherdstown, West Virginia.
The National Register is a tool in that it helps to maintain what we have. The way of life still exists pretty much the way it was. It was a frontier town in the beginning, and travelers came here to the Antler Hotel and stayed. If Shepherdstown somehow got overdeveloped, buildings were demolished, dormitories were built along the main street, which is German Street, you would lose that rural village ambience. You'd lose the history of the development of the architecture in this town. We have architecture that represents the early log houses, the early stone houses, architecture that goes right up through the 19th century to the turn of the century. It is a study in the development of American rural architecture.
We were interested in the building, the mill run building in downtown Shepherdstown, and then we became involved with Jean Crolius. She explained to us that the building was in the historic district, and since it was in the historic district and on the National Register, that it qualified for historic tax credits. Once we ran the numbers knowing that, then it made it a worthwhile project. People, businesses come to Shepherdstown specifically because of the way it looks. So anytime we preserve a building in the same character as the rest of the town, as a businessman, it's going to increase the flow of people through town because we're maintaining a character. And this building is part of the character of Shepherdstown.
As you look up and down our main street, we quite often get questions from people, this is a marvelous little town, and whose foundation funded all this? Well, it wasn't founded by anyone's foundation. The buildings individually have been purchased, restored, and maintained by individuals or by private developers who see the value of the standards that the National Register has established.
This has been a historic district, so that the community is well aware of it and very proud of it. And people in this area are beginning to realize the value of preservation and the hand-to-hand effort with tourism. The National Register is more than a plaque on the wall. Properties that are on the National Register document our history.
The story of our nation is the story of many people. The National Register recognizes sites that are of importance to a particular people. In America's Southwest, the National Register is used as a mechanism to recognize important historic sites associated with early Spanish settlement and to preserve not just physical structure, but cultural traditions and a way of life.
The National Register was a tool for identifying buildings that were significant, the conditions of buildings, and to give us a baseline for assisting communities.
The whole community of San Jeronimo is on the National Register. It's a district, and the Church of San Jeronimo is a contributing structure in that district. What the community is doing now is reestablishing the mud plaster, and they intend to keep and to maintain the mud plaster. Many of the traditions that are used in building these structures are passed on verbally from father to son, from grandmother to granddaughter. And in order to pass the information along, certain sayings, certain idioms came together in the communities to help them translate the tradition to the next generation. For example, in New Mexico, there's a saying called "Un adobe sin paja es un adobe sin alma," and that means an adobe without straw is an adobe without soul. So you don't build anything without a soul, especially a church.
My name is Pete Esperanza. My grandfather was one of the carpenters that built this church. So something told me to come over here and work on it.
There's a lot of family roots here. There's a lot of memories of very important things that have taken place here. I think that we need to keep it alive. First of all, we'll probably never see any more churches like this, built like this, with walls that are 3 feet thick. I certainly feel like I'm playing a strong part in the tradition and keeping it alive as far as fixing the church, feeding the people, and a lot of hearts and souls have been put into this church, and I don't think it should be thrown down.
I think traditional building materials are very important when you're dealing with a culture that is intact. It allows for continuity from the past to the present. In the words of Jose Gurule up in La Cueva, where the door has drugged the wooden floor and kind of dug a gouge in it, he said, "I want to leave that. I don't want to change these boards. This is what my grandfather did when he opened the door." For him, it was an immediate, tangible connection with the past. And I think in terms of cultural preservation, the best key to cultural preservation is working on historic buildings in traditional methods.
Okay, so without anything, that's a lot of information to hold, but I'd like to introduce historian Porter. It includes the Gilmore gas station in Hollywood, the Little Country Church of Hollywood, the Lloyd Wright Headley Handley House, the Uplifters Club, the Philosophical Research Society, St. John's Episcopal Church, McCarty Memorial Christian Church, 9 historic bridges over the Los Angeles River, the Georgian Hotel, Mayfair Theater, and a multitude of redevelopment projects in the Los Angeles area. So please welcome Portia Lee.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. You can't hear me yell.
Let me get this down.
Hmm?
Let me get this down.
Okay. Public meetings, it's really sometimes difficult because they make the lecterns high, but in this case I'm comfortable. I want to speak to you today about my job, what this church has entrusted me to do, and that is to make the church what is known as a county point of historic interest. Now, this is one of the landmark criteria. You saw in that excellent video preservation on a national level. That's the National Register of Historic Places. The states also have programs of historic preservation, in our program, the California Historic Preservation has a council, has a board, and if you want to be a state monument, you go up to Sacramento and you meet certain terms. And for your property, because we're generally property oriented, building oriented, although certainly you can nominate a site. You know, if something's gone, you can nominate the site. You can also nominate certain kinds of landscapes, cultural landscapes. But generally, preservation is thought of as building preservation, or as you saw in the video, archaeology. We also operate on the city level. And those of you who've lived in Los Angeles probably know that Los Angeles has an important program called the Los Angeles City Historic Cultural Monuments. And I, as Karen told you, have a certain number of buildings and so on that list. Now, when this was all set up, which is back in 1976, that left out people who were in unincorporated areas, right? There was no, who was to speak for you all, for the county? So in order to remedy this hole, they created county points of historic interest, which I will read you the criteria in a moment for the county points of historic interest. Over time, this program kind of fell by the wayside. Preservation is like a lot of other ideal situations. You have to keep it going. It's like a tree, right? You have to water it. You have to think about it. You have to keep your support going. So unfortunately, the county point of historic interest program kind of began to go by the wayside. So the state, to its everlasting honor, in my view, picked it up. And so now it's known as the California point of historic interest. And it's this California point of historic interest that we are seeking from the state office, which has quarterly hearings. On August the 5th, I will go up to wherever they have the meeting, because they move the meetings around the state, to be fair, and persuade them that this church should be a county point of historic interest. Now, the basis, as you could see, is in the Public Resources Code. This is actually a governmental program. It's in, if you want to look it up, it's in section 5031 of the Public Resources Code. All resources must be of statewide historical importance to California. They must demonstrate their statewide significance by meeting one of the following requirements. The property is the first, last, only, or most significant historical property of its type in the region. Because, of course, we are not going for a state landmark, we're going for a county landmark. The regions are Southern California, Central California, and Northern California. If a property has lost its historic appearance, it may be listed as a site. And that's the first criteria. The first, last, and only or most significant historical property of its type in the region, which is pretty big, pretty good order. Secondly, the property must be associated with an individual or a group having a profound influence on the history of California. The primary emphasis should be on the place or achievement of an individual or a group. If a property has lost its historic appearance, again, it may be listed as a site. Now, what they're talking about there is integrity. And integrity is an extremely important thing in a building. A building will not qualify if it doesn't have integrity. Integrity has 7 aspects, and they go location, design, setting, materials, workmanship, okay? This building, I was happy to be able to write about, has almost total integrity. What that means is it hasn't been changed. It looks just exactly the same on the outside with, some leeway for the ravages of time. And as far as I've been able to ascertain, it looks the same way on the inside. Although if any of you know otherwise, please let me know, as it did on the day it was built. If that is true, then it has what is known as total integrity. We often speak of substantial integrity, and all a building is really required to have is substantial integrity. We have one more criterion for the point. The property must be a prototype or an outstanding example of a period, style, architectural movement, or construction, or one of the more notable works, or the best surviving work in a region of a pioneer architect, designer, or master builder. An architectural landmark must have excellent physical integrity, including integrity of location. And what that means is it can't be moved. If you pick it up and move it somewhere, it's lost integrity, okay? Now, there's one more caveat here that's extremely important and comes up with respect to this church, and that is called the 50-year rule. With one set of exceptions, a property to qualify for any sort of designation must be 50 years old. Now, since this church was formally opened in 1953, it just barely makes it, right? And it also needs to have what's known as a period of significance. And that's the period when it really established its historical and architectural integrity. Whenever you write a landmark application, you had best put it in certain terms that the state often understands. And they want to know what is the context of the building. And you'll immediately understand that when I say that I made the context for this building was missionary, rural, vernacular churches, Los Angeles County, 1949 to 1954. Okay? That's what I'm telling them is the context for this building. All right? So that's the criteria. That's what you have to do to meet the requirement. But the most important part of the application is what is known as the significance statement. In other words, you can have all those things I just said to you. You know, integrity, interesting architecture, maybe association. We call the association criteria with people and events. If this church was associated with certain people or events, that makes it historic. And it makes it what is known as significant. So the key word to all this is significance. And the register and all the state rules say the building must convey its significance. And to me, that's almost the cornerstone of my work and what I believe in preservation. What you mean when you say a building conveys its significance is you go out the door and you step back a few paces and you turn around and look at it. And it better speak to you. Right now, that's how I know. People often ask me, how do you know a building is significant? And I say, in my humble view, I know because it will convey its significance. It will tell me right away that it means something important in historical, cultural terms. Right? By my training, I'm an American cultural historian. I'm also an architectural historian. But the important thing to me is that the building conveys its significance. And when I first came to this church, and Karen asked me to come, and I got out of the car after the long drive, attempting to stand up, so I'd make a good impression, I looked at the building, and I said right away, wow, where did they get that architecture? Right away, and the wheels start moving. It looks like a church. Now I knew that it was built as I thought then, the 30s. It now turns out it was built a bit later. And I thought, who built a church like this, you know, in 1942 or whatever it is? And then I have to start figuring out the puzzle and putting together the pieces in the puzzle. And the gentleman, Reverend Rabel, who was here earlier, put some of those pieces in the puzzle, didn't he? No, it isn't an Art Deco church. It isn't an international modern church. It's a rural vernacular church. Somebody was looking at churches in the East, weren't they? Or they were looking at pictures in a book. And so what is a church? You know, like you do when you're a kid. You know, here's the church, here's the steeple, right? Open the door and there's all the people. Well, it's that kind of a historic country church. So then right away, you know, that was in the mind of the guys who built it. That was what they wanted to build. And then for people like me who have what I think is the best job in the world, I can start figuring out how this came about, who brought it about, and the most important thing of all, why is it significant? Why is it important? What is it? Why should you keep it standing? Right? Why do people do this? Why do we go through these exercises? I think as you saw in the video, you know, the famous saying, in order to know where you're going, you have to know where you've been. That's exactly what happens with buildings. That's one of the great values of the past. The past is conceived of, as I understand it, as a road marker. That's the way you keep going down the road, is because you can look behind, or you somehow carry with you the influences of what went behind. And that is quite obvious in this church. Even though, if you look at this interior, then you see something else about what they wanted to do. They wanted to announce themselves as a rural vernacular country church. But when you come inside, you see right away, doesn't look like the Presbyterian church I was in when I was a kid, you know. You see there's the lack of iconography, but there is this beautiful church that the gentleman, this beautiful cross that the gentleman made. So I know almost right away, it's a non-denominational church. It tells me that that's what it is. So I want to conclude by going back to this knotty problem, because maybe you can help me with this knotty problem, which is, why is it significant? Because I have to persuade the State Office of Historic Preservation that this building is significant. And I believe and trust that I can do that successfully. But how do I get there? You see, why do I say it is important? And its importance is going to go back to your town, to the history of Topanga, right? Not the history in the sense that there was a ranch out here in 1832, although that would certainly figure into it as well. But what was in the mind of Mr. Utterback when he started the Union Sunday School, right? That is reflected in this building. Because the history doesn't really matter to the state office unless I can persuade them that the history is in this building and the way this building looks, okay? What persuaded people to come out on hot days like the one today and pour cement and saw boards so that they could take from if my memory serves me, here in 1940, when did they start building? 49? It took them from 49 to 53 to put this up, see? Now it seems to me that tells me something about Topanga. From what I know about Topanga, you know, you've always been, again, a non-denominational community, right? This has always been the community of people who wanted to come out and live a certain way and live rural lives, or have a connection with the city, but yet enjoy the countryside. Sort of, as we say, people who wanted to do their own thing through the 50s and the 60s and so on. And what impresses me the most about this church, and this is what I would like to conclude with, is its stability. Because I don't think of your community in terms of the kind of stability that you see down in big bad Los Angeles, right? And yet there are a good many of you, I found out by socializing a bit today, who've lived here a good number of years, particularly those of you in the historical, like 20, 30, 40 years. Now it seems to me that's stable by anybody's standards. So there's something here that brought people here, that keeps people here. And it's, I think, that spirit of community that helps me to persuade the state office that this is an important building, because this building stands for this community and represents this community. And it is what we call, in technical terms, a landmark. And that means that you drive down the road and you see it. In fact, I didn't read it to you, but one of the points, one of the specific issues in the point that you have to meet is, they say, the landmark must be visibly accessible from the roadway. Okay? You gotta see it. If you don't see it, you know, you don't qualify. So it seems to me what they're telling you there is the building has to convey its significance to the folks going by. And I can't believe that this building doesn't do that. And I think you will agree with me that it does that. It's very interesting building. It's interesting to think about building a rural vernacular church in a style that we associate with the East, but is in fact the West, which I think reflects the fact that it was begun by an Eastern institution. And it's also very interesting to think about people coming all the way across the U.S. to Topanga, California, and then finding Mr. Utterback in 1933 to come out here and start Sunday schools. He had a Sunday school, as you know, as you've heard. They started with the Sunday school, and then it was part of the history and tradition of AMF that you started with the Sunday school and then you ended with the church. That didn't always happen, is my understanding. Sometimes the Sunday schools did not have continuity. But the interesting thing here is from 1933 to 1949 when the church has begun. The whole influence of the American missionary movement culminated in the building of this church in 1933. So that, it seems to me, is what historic preservation is about. It's to teach us something, right? It's to teach us how the country works, how the area works, what the people in it were thinking, and most importantly of all, what they were building, the kind of beauty and interesting structures and useful and practical structures that they built. So that's where we are today. We're waiting to go to the state office for the hearing, and wish us all luck.
And Larry, would you get up and ring that bell, please? Ring the bell. Larry, who's the tallest? Come on, whoever's the tallest. Okay, and please continue to attend the meetings.
Let it pull you up.
A little bit more. No. Larry. There's a method to it.
Oh, just a minute, Mom, and I'll help you. Just a minute.
Let's live in a hideout at Topanga. Come on, let's head out to them hills. Lots of stained glass, cold water in the bath. We can live without those fancy frills. Let's live in a tree in Topanga. Maybe in the leaves they'd leave us be. We could live in a squirrel hole and play our rock and roll. Come out on the limb and you can be a nut like me, yeah!